Hello and welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the steps it takes in order to line a bodice. Your example may be a little bit different than mine, but I'm going to show you with two different bodices, so hopefully it'll help you out in your own assembly. Let's go ahead and get started. My first bodice example is going to be this bodice that has a V neckline and then also it has no sleeves. Whenever you're doing a lining for a bodice, whatever you do to the main fabric, you're going to do the same thing to the bodice. This is before you actually put them together. So for this one, there's a seam down the middle and then I have a seam at the shoulder seams, and that's it. Now the lining is going to come in and I need to make sure that not only did I cut out the same pieces, but I also sewed the same part of it. So this is going to be my main fabric and here's my lining. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to place the pieces so they're right side to right side, and you're going to line it up so everything matches, and then just pin around the perimeter. Once everything's pinned, I'm going to talk about what you're going to sew. My bodice is unfolded just so we know what we're looking at. Front bodice, back bodice, this is the center back seam, neckline, bottom of the bodice, and then we have armhole side seam over here. Your pattern directions are going to tell you where exactly on the perimeter you need to stitch. You're never sewing completely around the whole thing because there always needs to be an opening so we can flip it right side out after we sew it. The lining, which is already pinned to my main fabric, serves two purposes. Not only does it make the inside look nicer, but it's also being used to finish edges. So you need to kind of think of it logically. Like, what are you trying to finish? I have this neckline, there's no collar or anything, so I need to finish the neckline. So I'm going to be stitching around here the lining to my main fabric. I'm also going to have no sleeves in this pattern. So therefore I'm using my lining to finish the armhole, and I'm going to be sewing this whole curved edge right here. This bodice has a skirt that's going to be sewn to the bottom. So the skirt is actually helping to finish the edge of the bottom of the bodice. So down here at the bottom, this side, and the bottom of the bodice on this side, I don't need to sew because it's going to be sewn later and therefore it's going to be finished. Our center back seam, I know for this particular pattern, there's going to be a zipper. That zipper is also going to help finish this edge, so therefore I don't need to sew this either. So I can go ahead and remove pins from areas that I know I don't need to sew, just so I don't get confused. So to clarify, I need to finish the neckline, finish the armhole. So I'm going to be sewing around the neckline curve and then also both my armhole curves. Let's look at another example. Now this is more of a traditional looking bodice. It's actually a doll's bodice, that's why it's so small. So this is my main fabric, and again, everything I did up until this point for this, I need to do the same thing for my lining. So I have the shoulder seam sewn, I have the side seam sewn. So this is the front of the bodice. Here's the back of the bodice with the center back seam down the middle, and then we have armholes on the side. So this is right side out. This is right side to right side, and I'm going to lay them on top of each other so everything matches. So again, I'm going to think about what do I need to finish. Now, just to go over what I don't need to sew is, the bottom of the bodice, again, is going to be sewn to a skirt, so I don't need to sew around the perimeter of the bottom of the bodice. This bodice is also going to have sleeves. So the sleeves are going to fit in the armholes, and they're going to finish the raw edges. So I don't need to sew my lining here at the sleeves, not yet anyways. So sleeves are out. Looking at the back, I'm going to have another fastener. So I don't need to finish the center back seam. But I am going to have it attached again to the neckline. Let's pull this out so we can look at our neck curve. So I would pin my lining to this neck curve area. This again is a center back. I'm not sewing here, so it's just going to be this area here. And then that's going to attach my lining to the bodice. We're finishing our raw edges, so you're going to want to do this in a regular straight stitch. And whatever your seam allowance is for your pattern, you're going to do the same thing, unless it states something different in your directions. So if your pattern says 5/8 of an inch, you're going to do 5/8 of an inch for this as well. Just be careful going around curves if you have them, because we want to make sure if we're doing something like a neckline, it ends up as perfect as possible. After the seams are sewn, the most important step then is to make sure you trim your seam allowance and clip notches. This seam allowance over here for my armhole has already been trimmed, so you're leaving about 1/4 of an inch away from the stitches left. You can see this one has not been trimmed. It's still the 5/8, and the reason is because after we flip this right side out, all the seam allowance is going to be sandwiched in between the lining and the main fabric, and especially for curved areas, it could get all bunched up and look pinched or wrinkled because you have your seam allowance in the way. So we want to cut away the excess. So I'm going to trim this, again, leaving about 1/4 of an inch. And then for any curved areas, you're going to cut little inverted notches, and you can see them here. They just look like little triangles. And you're being sure that you don't actually cut into your stitches, because we want to make sure that we don't actually cut a hole, and that's what happens if you cut into your seam allowance. So don't cut into the seam line. I have them about maybe 1 inch apart, and you only need to really do them for the curved areas. Any areas where you have an angle like this, you can go ahead and cut off the corner. For an area like this, which is a V-neck, I actually try to cut away most of this seam allowance and cut almost to the point of where my stitches are. So that'll be a nice finished point once I flip it right side out, and I won't have all this fabric bunched up into this area. So here is my doll bodice, and after you trim it, you can go ahead and flip everything so the right side of the fabric is on the outside, and now the wrong side of the fabric are together on the inside of your bodice. Usually pattern directions will ask next for understitching and or top stitching. We're going to talk about understitching first. What understitching does is it's a stitch that helps keep our lining on the inside of our bodice, so it doesn't just keep rolling out and we see the lining, because the lining is supposed to stay on the inside. To do an understitch, we're looking at the right side of the bodice, so main fabric, lining. You're going to take your seam allowance, and the seam allowance is going to stay closed, and it's going to go towards the lining. So here it's going towards my main fabric. I want it to go towards the lining. So it's all going to be under there, and I can actually feel it with my finger. You're going to take it to your machine, and you're going to stitch as close to the seam line as possible, and we're stitching that seam allowance now to the lining. So this is going to help us be able to fold the lining much easier so it stays on the inside and we get more of a crisper edge to the outside of the bodice. The understitch is done with a regular straight stitch, and you can see I'm sewing on the side of my lining, but I'm staying as close to that seam line as I can, and I'm always checking to make sure that my seam allowance is underneath my lining. The problem with the understitch is sometimes it can be tricky to sew the whole length in one stitch because areas are sewn together, so it's just really hard and your fabric starts bunching up. So you really just go as far as you can, and then just start at the opposite end and move towards your original stitch. And if you can't do the whole thing, then that's fine. The stitch ends up on the inside of the bodice anyways, so no one's really going to see it, and you just do the best that you can. If we flip this over, you can see the understitch right here. So that is on the inside of the garment. Now your pattern may not necessarily ask for an understitch, but it is fairly common, which is why I went over it. Next, we're going to be talking about a top stitch. So the top stitch is going to go through both layers, so the top and the bottom, and you're just going to stitch right along the edge, and that's going to be a finishing stitch. The top stitch is also a regular straight stitch, and you can see I'm sewing really close to that edge, and this is going to give your garment a finished look. Any areas that have not been sewn, that are still separate, such as the center back, the bottom of the bodice, or armholes, you can go ahead and do a basting stitch. The basting stitch is just a temporary stitch, so you don't have to do any back stitching, and it's going to be the longest stitch on your machine. The sides that have been basted will allow you to be able to treat these raw edges as one single piece instead of two separate pieces, so it'll make it easier for the rest of your assembly. New tutorials are released weekly, so please subscribe to be notified of the next release. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 200 sewing video tutorials, including our exclusive premium content. Our premium membership is only $5 a month for unlimited access and only available at ProfessorPincushion.com. Also, don't forget to download our mobile app for videos on the go. Thanks for watching.